Good afternoon, scaredy cats. Hope you enjoy the video today and please like, comment, and subscribe. The group of teenagers had heard rumors about an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. They decided to explore the hospital, thinking it would be a fun adventure. As they entered the hospital, they noticed that it was completely silent. The air was musty and stale, and the corridors were dark and eerie. As they made their way through the hospital, they started to hear strange noises. The sound of footsteps echoing through the halls, the creaking of doors, and the occasional whisper. Suddenly, one of the teenagers disappeared, and the group realized that they were not alone in the hospital. They tried to call out to their missing friend, but there was no answer. As they searched for their friend, they found evidence that something sinister was happening in the hospital. Bloodstains on the walls, strange symbols etched into the floors, and the occasional scream echoing through the halls. The group started to feel like they were being watched, and they began to see shadows moving in the corners of their eyes. They realized that they were not just exploring an abandoned hospital, they were in the midst of a supernatural horror. As the night wore on, the group dwindled, one by one falling to the horrors that lurked in the hospital. In the end, only one teenager remained, haunted by the memories of what had happened in the abandoned hospital. They warned others not to explore the hospital, for fear that they too would be consumed by the darkness that dwelled within its walls. The babysitter arrived at the house to find a strange child waiting for them. The child was quiet and distant, and the babysitter sensed that something was not quite right. As the night went on, the babysitter started to notice strange things happening in the house. Doors would open and close on their own, and footsteps could be heard echoing through the halls. Then, the babysitter heard a voice whispering in their ear, but when they turned around, there was no one there. They started to feel like they were being watched, and the feeling only grew stronger as the night went on. In a moment of terror, the babysitter realized that the child was not alone. There was another presence in the house, and it was something dark and malevolent. The babysitter tried to leave the house, but the doors and windows had been locked from the outside. They were trapped, alone with the child and the dark presence that lurked in the shadows. As the night wore on, the situation grew more and more terrifying. Objects began to move on their own, and the child's behavior grew more and more erratic. In the end, the babysitter was able to break free and escape the house. They never found out what had happened to the child, or what had caused the strange presence in the house. But they knew that they had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, and that the darkness that had consumed the house was not something that should ever be trifled with. The person had just moved into their new home, and while exploring the house, they discovered a hidden door in the basement. Curiosity getting the best of them, they opened the door and descended the staircase, revealing a hidden basement. As they looked around the room, they noticed strange markings on the walls and floor. The air was thick with a musty smell, and there were old, rusted tools scattered around the room. Suddenly, the person noticed something in the corner of the room, a human skeleton, partially buried under the dirt. The person was horrified, realizing that they had stumbled upon something much more sinister than they could have ever imagined. As they continued to investigate, they found more evidence of the dark history of the basement. It was revealed that the previous owner of the house had been a serial killer, using the basement as a torture chamber for his victims. The person tried to leave the house and alert the authorities, but they found that the doors and windows had been locked from the outside. They were trapped in the basement with the remains of the killer's victims. In a desperate attempt to escape, the person found a loose board in the wall and was able to break through, leading them to freedom. They contacted the police and led them to the house, where the killer was finally brought to justice. But the person could never forget the horror they had experienced in that hidden basement, haunted by the screams of the killer's victims. The person had rented a cozy cabin in the woods, hoping for a peaceful and relaxing vacation. The cabin was nestled deep in the forest, surrounded by nothing but trees and wildlife. As the person settled in, they noticed strange sounds coming from outside the cabin. At first, they assumed it was just the sounds of the forest, but the noises grew louder and more persistent. As the night fell, the person heard strange whispers coming from the darkness outside the cabin. The whispers sounded like they were coming from right outside the cabin door. The person cautiously opened the door, but there was no one there. They brushed it off as their imagination and went back inside, hoping to get some sleep. But as the night wore on, the person started to feel like they were being watched. They could hear footsteps outside the cabin and the occasional rustling of leaves. Suddenly, the person saw a shadow move past the window, and they realized that they were not alone in the woods. As the days went on, the person became more and more convinced that they were being stalked by something sinister. They tried to leave the cabin, but every time they tried to venture into the woods, they were met with a sense of foreboding and danger. In the end, the person was able to escape the cabin, forever scarred by the terror they had experienced. They never spoke of what had happened in the woods, but they knew that they would never be the same again. The person had hired a clown to entertain at their child's birthday party. The clown arrived early and seemed friendly enough, but as the party got underway, things took a dark turn. The clown's jokes were inappropriate and made some of the children uncomfortable. The clown's makeup started to smear, revealing a sinister expression underneath. The person started to regret their decision to hire the clown, but it was too late. The clown had taken over the party, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. As the partygoers started to leave, the person tried to confront the clown, but they were met with a cold, unfeeling stare. The person realized that the clown was not there to entertain, but to terrorize. As the night wore on, strange things started to happen in the house. Objects moved on their own, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls. The person realized that the clown had brought a malevolent force into their home, and they were at its mercy. In the end, the person was able to banish the clown and the dark entity that had come with it. But the memory of the terrifying birthday party would haunt them forever. They warned others to be careful when hiring entertainers, for fear that they too would unleash something dark and dangerous. It was the child's birthday, and they had received many gifts from friends and family. But one gift stood out among the others, a creepy, old-fashioned doll with a porcelain face and glassy eyes. At first, the child was fascinated with the doll and played with it constantly. But soon, strange things began to happen around the house. Objects would move on their own, strange noises could be heard in the night, and the child started having nightmares. One day, the child's parents found the doll in a different position from where they had left it, and they started to become concerned. They tried to get rid of the doll, but every time they did, it would mysteriously reappear in the child's room. As the days went on, the family became more and more terrified of the doll. They started to notice that its expression seemed to change, and that its eyes seemed to follow them around the room. One night, the family was awoken by a loud banging coming from the child's room. When they went to investigate, they found the doll had come to life and was wreaking havoc in the room. The family managed to escape the room and lock the doll inside, but they could still hear its laughter echoing through the halls. In the end, they had to call in a team of paranormal investigators to remove the doll from the house and bring an end to the terror it had caused. The group of friends set out for a weekend camping trip in the woods, excited to spend some time away from the stresses of everyday life. As they set up camp, they noticed that something felt off about the woods, but they brushed it off as nerves. As night fell, the group gathered around the fire, telling stories and laughing. But as the night wore on, they started to hear strange noises coming from the darkness beyond the trees. The cracking of twigs, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional snap of a branch. Suddenly, one of the friends disappeared into the woods, their screams echoing through the night. The rest of the group searched for their missing friend, but they were nowhere to be found. As the group tried to make their way back to camp, they realized that they were being stalked by something. Something dark and malevolent, with eyes that glowed in the darkness. The group tried to outrun the creature, but it seemed to be everywhere at once. They started to realize that they were not alone in the woods, and that something was hunting them. As the night wore on, the group dwindled, one by one falling to the creature's attacks. In the end, only one person remained, alone in the darkness, surrounded by the sounds of the creature's breathing. The sun rose, and the lone survivor emerged from the woods, forever scarred by the terror they had experienced. They never spoke of what had happened in the woods, but they knew that they would never be the same again. The driver was tired and eager to get home after a long day at work. As he drove down the dark, deserted road, he saw a figure on the side of the road, hitchhiking. Against his better judgment, he decided to pick up the stranger. The hitchhiker was a tall, thin man with a blank expression on his face. He sat silently in the passenger seat, not saying a word. The driver tried to make small talk, but the hitchhiker seemed uninterested. As they continued down the road, the driver began to notice something strange about the hitchhiker. His skin seemed to be pale and cold, and his eyes had a strange, almost supernatural glow. Suddenly, the hitchhiker turned to the driver and spoke, his voice cold and emotionless. "You shouldn't have picked me up," he said. "You've made a grave mistake." The driver tried to pull over and kick the hitchhiker out of his car, but the doors and windows were locked. The hitchhiker grinned, revealing sharp, pointed teeth, and the driver realized that he was not dealing with a normal human being. The hitchhiker proceeded to torment the driver with horrific visions and threats, until the driver finally managed to escape and run for his life. From that day on, the driver never picked up another hitchhiker again, and warned others to do the same. It started with a small movement in the corner of the mirror's reflection. At first, the person thought it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. But as the days went on, the movements became more pronounced, and they began to see shapes and figures moving in the reflection. As the person tried to investigate, they found that the movements were only visible in the mirror, and not in reality. They began to feel like they were losing their mind, as the figures seemed to grow more and more grotesque with each passing day. One night, the person decided to stay up and watch the mirror, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing the movements. As the clock struck midnight, the reflection suddenly shifted, revealing a dark figure standing behind them in the room. The person turned around to face the figure, but it was nowhere to be found. They turned back to the mirror, only to see the figure grinning back at them, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Terrified, the person tried to break the mirror, but found that it was unbreakable. They were trapped, unable to escape the terror that lay within the mirror's reflection. In the end, the person was consumed by the darkness, and the mirror became a portal to a world of nightmares. Anyone who gazed into its depths would be forever lost, doomed to spend eternity in a world of terror and despair. The group of friends had heard about a Ouija board and decided to try it out. They gathered in a dimly lit room and placed their fingers on the planchette, eager to contact the spirits. At first, the Ouija board seemed like a harmless game. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out innocuous words and phrases. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere in the room grew tense. The planchette started to move more quickly, spelling out dark and ominous messages. The group realized that they had unleashed something sinister, something that was not a mere game. Suddenly, objects in the room started to move on their own. The temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. The group tried to stop the game, but the planchette continued to move on its own, spelling out cryptic messages. As the night wore on, the group realized that they were no longer in control. Something dark and malevolent had taken over, and they were at its mercy. In the end, the group was able to break free from the Ouija board's spell, but they knew that they had come dangerously close to unleashing something that they could not control. They warned others not to play with Ouija boards, for fear that they too would be consumed by the darkness that lurked within.